Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we are working on prototyping and making a big batch of fur forms. In the last few videos where I've been working here at the bench area, you might have noticed these collecting behind me. This is the project. So if you're going to be predator hunting or trapping, you need a good collection of fur forms. It's very important to get your furs dried as quickly as humanly possible to prevent hair slippage. The drying of the leather shrinks the skin around the hair follicle and holds it in place, and it sets up for good tanning. But if you just dry them in a lump, they'll end up in a lump with no shape, size, or good-lookingness whatsoever. So we don't want to do that. We want to dry them over a nice form, and the goal isn't to stretch them larger than they are in life, because in the tanning process they're going to, if you let them shrink up too much, they'll expand a little bit, and if you overstretch them, they will kind of shrink in a bit in the tanning process. But, so we don't want to try and force them to be larger than they are, but we want them to dry in their proper shape at their proper size, okay? So that the hair follicles are locked in place, and we're set up with a nice shape that's nice, right, and tight and true for the next step, for the tanning. At the end of the tanning, we want to block it so that it comes out nice, straight, right, and tight and true for the start of the sewing process. Every point along the way, keep your stuff neat and tidy so that you set yourself up on the right foot for the next step of your process. That's true if you're making your own stuff from your own furs, and that's also true if you're selling them, because the auction houses want everything in a standard form, because their fur buyers know what I'm telling you, and they're going to sell it to somebody else who's going to tan it and wants the same thing, right? So we need a nice collection of these. If you go online and look to buy wooden stretchers, they're going to look more like this. This is a skunk board. And the advantage of a wooden stretcher is that you can put the skin over it. We don't want to pull it too tight. We don't want to overstretch it. But you can put it over the board and then pin it out so everything is straight and pretty looking. Okay, and that sets you up to be nice and straight and right and tight and true. The disadvantage is this is solid and doesn't allow for air movement or much air movement. Yes, you have a belly wedge, but it doesn't allow for much air movement inside the pelt. So it takes longer to dry, which is a greater risk of hair slippage, especially in warm weather, or if an animal has been dead for a little while. Like if it's legal in your state to pick up roadkill and that's how you're getting your fur pelts, you don't know how long it's been there, so it's got to get dried as quickly as humanly possible to lock those hair follicles in. Okay? The other commercial stretcher that you can buy is a wire form. Think this same shape, but made out of coat hanger, basically. And then they have two hooks at the bottom. So one hook goes in the feet, the other hook goes in the tail, and that will, hold the fur to its proper length, but it will not let you pin everything straight, get everything nice and perfect the way you might wish. So this is the first prototype of this, and I made this cut out to the maximum possible size with still having strength in the edges to have the maximum airflow. And then the tail board so that we can still pin everything out nice and tight and true. Okay? So I didn't like this as well as my subsequent boards with these lugs, which help for indexing. And also, if you think about, working with these in a fur shed, when they're kind of thumping on the ground, that'll stop this from putting shearing stress on the glue line. Okay? So I like this better than that, but again, variation of prototyping. This is the medium board, the medium raccoon, and this is the larger raccoon. The outside of all of these catch all of the minimum to maximum sizes of raccoon boards published on the auction house websites describing the size and shape that they want their critters. So I am harvesting for my own use. I don't really intend to sell much, if anything, of my furs, but I'm going to be tanning my own stuff and making my own stuff. If you're doing this to sell, then you want the standard auction house sizes, And the outside dimensions of these are those. The inside dimensions with the cutout, I've made the largest cutout that the body length of an animal at a particular length will allow me to make for maximum airflow. And these dimensions, as well as the ratio of how long the, for lack of a better word, foot pinning area goes to the tail pinning area, that's all based on the literature and descriptions of the various range of body lengths and body part lengths of raccoons. Now, this set of boards will also get you most of your similar chunky critters, right? So most of your, bobcats, small lynx, badger, all those sorts of guys, your larger skunks, will fit on this set of 3 boards. You won't get your biggest lynx and you won't get your biggest wolverine on these, but smaller versions of those critters you'll get. And we have more boards to talk about. So these are the fox boards. Same idea. Here, these are slightly modified. Are the tips in view here, beloved? Okay. These are slightly modified to have a little bit of a hollow cutout here in the neck area, so it doesn't overstretch the neck. Okay. Again, there is, some elasticity in the hide. If you overstretch it, some of that will rectify when you're tanning it, but if you badly overstretch it, you can end up, even in the tan pelt, with thinned out fur around the neck, so we don't want that. So these foxes are thinned down in this neck profile. We have a smaller one and a slightly larger one, because not all foxes are the same size. There's half a dozen species of red fox plus gray fox, which are quite a bit smaller, and Arctic fox, which are on par with the largest subspecies of red fox. So, somebody who's, predator hunting or trapping down in Louisiana with small red fox and gray fox doesn't need the same board sizes as somebody who's trapping on Kodiak Island with some of the biggest red fox on the continent. So you can modify these, and we talk in the video when I describe my process of making these boards. We talk about how to modify them. Okay, so both of these are made from actually the same physical wooden pattern, but in the pattern set I'm providing you on Patreon, you have both sizes. Okay. So, but I do want to mention you can modify these to meet your requirements, and if you have solid boards that you want to transition to wooden boards, you can make an oversized wooden board and then cut out, like trace your solid board over top of it, and then customize them to exactly what you want. Okay. Then we have 3 sizes of otter. Same story. A small, a medium, and a large. Some of these are quite large because the biggest otters are really big critters. The small one is, actually my prototype on this was cut out of a red fox board. Okay. The medium will do the largest of the otters that you'll see on the East Coast, and you only need the big one if you're, again, Pacific Northwest with some really gigantic river otters. Okay. But I did want to mention that, the prototype for the small otter, which will do probably about 2/3 of the otters you're likely to see on the East Coast, was cut out of a red fox board. So you don't need to just preemptively make all of these. You can make a couple extras of the ones you expect to use, and then, especially here in the East, a lot of states you can only get 1 tag a year, or maybe some even have a lottery for a tag. If you would happen to get one, you could get your hand plane out and just cut down a larger board to fit something like this. Okay? So, infinitely modifiable. And then lastly, the coyote boards. So this is the standard coyote board, and it is 9 inches wide here at the base of the cutout and 10 inches wide overall. Okay. This is sort of the median range of an eastern coyote. It also, if I bring this over a little bit, has the hollow cutout so we don't overstretch the necks, because all the canines have the long, slim necks. Okay. And this size is the minimum, from the tip to here, is the minimum length that the auction houses want to see to be able to sell a coyote such that that pelt can produce an entire ruff fur coat. Shorter than this, you're going to have a real hard time selling that pelt. You might as well make some mittens for the family out of it. Okay? This and longer is good. And if you see behind me, that is a full-size Timberwolf board made from the same pattern. I'll get back to that in a second. And the base of the cutout on this is the minimum length where the largest eastern coyotes sometimes get sold as though they're small Timberwolves. Okay? So that's a length gauge for judging which is which. So that's the large one. Now, slightly smaller, you want to make more of these if you're out in the west and you just have smaller coyotes, or in the south, right? The northeastern coyote from the Central Appalachians up through the Canadian Maritimes is a hybrid with Timberwolf, so we have bigger animals than you do out west. So you would want to make a lot of the slightly smaller ones and only a couple of the larger. But then we also have an even larger coyote, which is expanded out to be 12 inches at the base. Okay, for some of those exceptionally large. So like this would be for a really fat northeastern coyote that wasn't long enough to need the longer Timberwolf board. And then the Timberwolf board itself. And all of those, plus the last one I'm going to talk about in a minute, were made from the same wooden pattern. But again, in the pattern set that I'm putting up on Patreon, you'll have more of these lines all ready to go. And in the video talking about process, I describe how I modify these. Right? Once you have the base pattern, you can easily modify it to fit exactly your needs and the animals that you're going to be dealing with in your hunting area. And then lastly, this is a coyote board made to standard coyote dimensions, standard published auction house dimensions, where you have the even curve on the outside. Okay. Now, this can overstretch the neck, especially on a smaller animal, if we're only talking about coyote, but you can use this on a coyote. But this is also the board that will do all of your larger lynx and larger wolverine. Okay, so if you're in an area that has big lynx or big wolverine, if you're up in Alaska and you're making the extra large fox board, you probably want to make a couple of these too. Because any of those critters which are too large to fit on the raccoon board series will fit on this. Okay? And again, made from the same pattern, modified a little bit, and I make this one on film for you. But again, I will give you this line in the patterns on Patreon. And those patterns are a set of 4 that are drawn on 8.5 by 11 paper, 5 to 6 pages long, so there's indexing marks so you can print it all out on regular typing paper and pin them together correctly. Okay, so it's easy to order them and get everything oriented correctly. And they have the lines for these patterns. Now, if you are if you're going to make a set of patterns in like a thin plywood, I would recommend just take those pieces of paper, tape them together, and then put some spray glue on them and just cut them out. Print them out 3 times because there's 3 patterns per page. Glue them on, cut them out, and have your master pattern. And then you can piece that in however you want on your lumber. My lumber is recycled fence boards. So I'm using full, actually 6 inches wide by actually 1 inch thick. And I'm machining them down because I'm recycling old, broken, pretty rough and ready, but free lumber to make this set of boards. If you're going out to buy lumber, all of these can be made from 1 by 6. Okay? So that would be what I start with. My process does require a thickness planer. I don't own one, but I have a family member who does. So if you're in a similar circumstance, you can go buy your 1 by 6, trace out, get everything glued up, and then take it to somebody who has a thickness planer and spend a couple hours planing them all down to 1/2 inch. Okay, so you'll be planing from 3/4 to 1/2 inch if you do that. I do recommend doing the glue up a little bit thicker because it can be difficult to get everything exactly 90-degree true. And if you have a little bit of a bend, then when you plane it flat, you're just planing it flat. It's not that big a deal, right? You can just clamp it, glue it, allow a little bit of bending and warpage, and when all the glue's dry and all of your lumber is dry and everything's good, then as your last step, take them all and plane them down. Okay, you could probably find a friend, a neighbor, a family member, or if you don't have any of those with a thickness planer, look up maker spaces near you. You might be able to find one of those that does. Okay, if you absolutely just cannot get that tool, it's probably not cost effective to buy thin stock lumber for this, but you could just get 1/2 inch plywood and just cut them out and not have any gluing required. Okay, so you could take your pattern pieces, you could cut out paper representations of the tail boards, spray glue it all to a piece of plywood, and just cut it right out and not have to worry about glue up. That's totally legitimate. In fact, if you're going to do really large wolf boards, I would actually recommend that you just go to plywood anyway. It's much less likely to cup than 15 to 17 inch wide 1x6, plain down to 1/2 inch, right? So probably your best bet to do that if you're going to make the largest wolf boards. And on that, I'm not putting a full-size pattern for this up on in the plan sheet, but the Coyote page will have very explicit instructions on how to take the Coyote pattern and turn it into the wolf pattern with just a small amount of extra measuring. So it's not a big deal to take the Coyote and turn it into the wolf. Okay? So I will take you through a synopsis of my pattern, my process. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail on the edge joining process because there is so much out there in the hand tool woodworking space on how to do exactly that anything I say would just be repetitive. Rex Kruger's a really good channel with a lot of beginners videos. Wood by Right is a good channel with a lot of beginners videos. Go check them out. They have tons of information on hand tool woodworking, and I could say the same things again, but I can't say it better than they've already said it. So just check their stuff out, and we'll keep this video a little bit shorter for that. So I am doing my cutout with a jigsaw, and then all of my fitting with a block plane and a rasp. So that's my toolkit for this. Raccoons, these are 3 sizes of raccoon board, have very little neck. They're basically a straight tube, right? An even-sized triangle. And this set of boards will fit any raccoon in existence, the majority of other critters, but also the majority of other critters that really don't have a whole lot of neck. So I've been basing my sizes for the outside dimensions off of the large auction house published board size and trying to get from the smallest to the largest. And when you start doing that and start comparing these board sizes to each other, you'll realize that a large number of critters, the boards are only different by length. Okay? So while these are based off of, the outside dimensions are based off of the published raccoon board sizes, and the inside dimensions are based on the length of the animals at certain ages based on the scientific literature for those animals. Because I'm a nerd. If you then start looking at the other critters, all but the smallest all but the smallest skunk will fit on these 2 boards. And then these 2 boards will fit the overwhelming majority of bobcat, lynx, wolverine, and badger, except for the largest possible wolverine and lynx. So for this 3 sets of boards, you get a huge array of critters that you can fit, because I paid attention to the scientific literature and made them long enough. Okay? Same thing when we start looking at the foxes. So foxes are a little different because they have a long neck, as do the coyotes, and you'll see that the foxes, it kind of comes, once you get to the shoulders, it diminishes more quickly. Okay? Same with the coyote, where they're designed to have a narrower neck. But if we take this and we just take a hand plane and we take this shoulder off, we can find a slightly smaller board inside of that, which exactly matches the published gray fox pattern, as well as a small river otter, or the biggest fisher that you're ever going to see. So again, in designing this board for gray fox, we also get an otter for free, and we get a small otter board for free and a large fisher board for free. So you don't need a whole ton of different sizes if you think ahead and make things long enough that you can accommodate some of these other critters. You don't need as big a collection of boards. That's enough jabbering about these. Let's talk about the patterns and laying them out on lumber so that we get the maximum utilization. Let's look at how layout goes in this. Now again, I'm using real rough and ready split out lumber. Can they see this section? Can they see all the way to the end, beloved?
No.
Over there, okay. Let me show you the other end of this board. Right, so split out, busted up, never going to be a fence board again. That's what we're starting with, okay? These are the patterns. This is the mid-sized raccoon pattern. And it's nice to have a narrow piece like this because you can fit it in and wiggle it in around knots, okay? This is where the tailboard goes in. The tailboards on the raccoons are 4-inch wide that I've been ripping with table saw from end scraps of this stuff. And this is the red fox pattern, okay, even more slender. And the tailboards for them, pull it out. The tailboards for them are 3.5 inches wide. You could adjust either way. If you're buying dimensional lumber and you want to use a 3.5-inch tailboard for a raccoon stretcher, you can just add a 1/4 inch to this, and that will subtract a 1/2 inch from both sides. Okay. 1/2 inch total, 1/4 inch from each side, right? And then you can use the 3.5 inch. Likewise, if you wanted to use a 4-inch tailboard on the fox pattern, you could subtract a 1/4 inch and leave that little extra space in there, okay? So, let me set that over there. These are all falling down. Lots of stuff to edit out.
Ooh, fine.
Oh, there. I need to fix the avalanche. Okay? Now, the coyote is doesn't have a separate tailboard because, again, they have stubbier tails in relation to their foot length. So there's no advantage to saving wood on that little space. If the tail is a certain length, the legs are going to be about that same length, and you're going to need that edge width. So let's look at some ways that we can work with this. Now, for the coyote pattern, the flat side is going to go right against the edge of the board when you trace one on. Okay. And so will the head of it. Okay. And then you're just going to simply trace around. Now you want to pick a good spot in the board where you're going to be able to get a good sturdy glue up to put each ends when you mirror these. When you're doing a complex pattern, you always want to draw half of the pattern and then mirror it. That's your best way to get symmetry. And if I put this board here and line that up, it is going to put the nose end of this right here in this real irregular grain where there's a lot of splitting. That won't be durable. If I need to use this for this board, I could also move this up. So now the body of it is in good wood, and the nose portion where it glues together is also in good wood. Is all this in view? Okay. And then I would be cutting around that. So we can shimmy and move these back and forth so that we get the best piece. If you download the patterns for these from the Patreon site, you will have the paper outline of this. But there's also other boards that we can make from this coyote board. Now, as I mentioned in kind of the intro to this is long enough for any western coyote that you'll ever meet. But here in the East, our coyotes have a substantial introgression of timber wolf DNA. So, there is an advantage to having an actual timber wolf form, even if you're only going to be going after eastern coyotes. You're not going to need it often, but you might need it once, right? So let's say we want to do that. Well, we can look up the dimensions of a timber wolf form, and we can see that it's 8 foot long and 12 inches or 13 inches wide, okay? So 12 to 13 inches wide and 8 feet long. Now we don't need to go all the way out to 13 inches. And this board is going to give me a full 6. Okay? Do I have 8 feet? I do. 8 feet is right there. And it will end in good wood right across that way. So we're going to just do a demonstration of modifying the pattern to make a different board. So if I mark 8 feet here, draw across, which end is the wood more intact? I think I like this side better than that side, so we'll put the nose of it here. Now, the 8 foot, the 12-inch width is going to start 4 feet down from the end. Okay, so we want to divide this in half. 4 foot mark. 4 foot mark, okay. So there's the published dimensions. The bottom 4 foot of a Timberwolf form, a true Timberwolf form, is going to be 12 inches to 13 inches wide for the last 4 foot of the board. So what we can do is we can take this, we can put the nose up here, and then extend the edge of this body piece until it goes all the way out to 6 inches. Instead of 5 inches, which is the design for the Coyote board. So we're making an extra inch in the width, and we're extending it long in case we would get one of those ridiculously long Eastern Coyotes. So there's a little bit more airspace. It's just a couple inches, but that also is kind of a visual reference, right? If a coyote fits on this board, you might want to use this board instead of the other, because you get a little extra airspace and it might go. If you're selling them, I'm not intending to sell any of mine, but it's a mark for you there. Now we can also do the same thing if we want a smaller board, because again, just like I was saying, not every muskrat is going to be the biggest muskrat of your life. So it makes sense to have some smaller boards. So if we want a smaller coyote, this pattern is designed to be about 9 inches wide, here about where you expect the base of the hide to be, and 10 inches wide maximum. Okay? But let's make a board for a coyote that is 8 inches wide maximum instead of 10 inches wide maximum. So then we want 4 inches. We're going to put a 4-inch mark here at the bottom. Okay? And then I'm going to line the back of this board up with that 4-inch mark, and the tip of his nose I'm going to line up here. Now as I'm drawing this lumber started full inch thick, and I've planed it down to 3/4 inch. So if you were buying nominal 1x6, it's very close to what I have. You wouldn't be able to go all the way out to 12 inches, obviously. You'd need to get a 1x8 for that. But if you were buying lumber, buying nominal 1x6, you'd be pretty much where I am with this. I like to glue these up, and we'll talk about glue up more later, 3/4 inch thick, and then plane them down to 1/2 inch. That way, if my angles of the glue up are off by a little bit, it'll just plane flat. And I don't have to be quite as perfect. Okay? So there, that will make an 8-inch wide, smaller coyote board. And that smaller coyote board will also grab, if you were to happen to get a gigantic fox. Like, I think, again, we don't have Arctic fox in Pennsylvania, but if you're watching this for somewhere where you do, I think they can get substantially bigger than the reds. You know, so you could take this and make that. Now this is a small coyote or the biggest fox of your life, and they'll overlap. And if it's a little too big for the biggest fox in your life, you could get a hand plane and just make it a little bit smaller for that guy. Okay? So that's another way we can modify these, making them smaller. And then I was talking about lynx and how the raccoon boards will pretty much cover all but the very biggest lynx or wolverine. So if you had those in your area, we could again modify the coyote board. Let me make a tracing here. For starters, okay. Now, if we pull over the biggest raccoon board, and the coyote board, if I put these on top of each other, you can see they are so darn close in size, it's ridiculous. The biggest difference is the coyote board is narrower in the neck. Okay? Let me put them the other way around to show you that. Okay? Right? You can see how much narrower the coyote is in the neck here than the raccoon. So if we want to turn, and that raccoon will do the majority of like lynx and wolverine. So if we want to turn this into a true biggest ever lynx or wolverine, if that's something you have in your section, we can draw the coyote board, and then we can take one of the raccoon board patterns, can line it up at the nose, then come all the way back here and line it up at the back, and then retrace and make a wider line. Okay? So this distance is the difference between the narrow canine neck and the narrow long canine neck and the short stout neck of your weasel family and cat family. Okay? So we can take this just by leaving a little bit more space. We can take this coyote form and turn it into a biggest lynx of your life, biggest wolverine of your life form. Okay? And if you have a set of forms that you really love and you really love the shape of, you can easily take these, and when you cut them out, I like to cut these with just a corded portable saw. I take the jigsaw to the wood. But you can use a turning saw if you want to do hand tools, or you could do a bandsaw, or you could do whatever saw you're comfortable with. Be safe. I'll say it this way. Whatever saw you're most comfortable with and safest with is the saw you should use to cut these out. Okay? But if you have a set of boards that you really like, you can take these and you can cut, just like, give yourself an extra 1/4 inch all the way around, glue it up the way I'm going to show you in the next section of this video, and then as a last step, come and trace over it and trim it down to the shape of the board that you really love, but now you'll have the inside dimension, okay, the inside airflow spot. Here we have the boards that we were just measuring all cut out and ready to start processing for glue up. Now this style, where you have all of the mating surfaces on the same edge, the same plane, is easier to work with than the ones with a tail board where one gluing edge is here and the other gluing edge is staggered out. Those are a little bit harder to get right. We'll talk about them in a bit. But these guys, it's really kind of a simple matter of taking a hand plane and just smoothing out these edges. Okay? So I'll put one of these in a vise, and I don't really have a good way to film this with my current setup, but we'll take one in a vise and smooth it off. Then the other, do the same. Stack them on top of each other, and then look through to see if there's light shining through. When there's no light shining through, then they're good. For the initial planing, I will usually put them in the vise face to face like this, and then plane them as one unit. That also helps you keep the plane square. Now, a couple things about this. This is a good skill building project if you want to learn edge joinery, because it has to be strong, so it'll hold your feet to the fire a little bit in that regard, but it doesn't have to be pretty. We're making a tool. We're not making a kitchen cabinet. Okay? So, if you have one flat edge and then the bottom edge has a bump, that's bad. That won't work. That's weak. Because this bump, if you're hitting here and not hitting anywhere in the middle, that's going to be a weak glue joint because you don't have good surface. However, if you have a flat here, and then you have a little bit of a dip in there, okay? That's fine. That's totally fine. You can have a straight line with a little dip here and then a straight line with a little dip here. As long as those aren't too big and you still have plenty of mating surface for a good glue edge, it will work perfectly well, okay? That won't work for a kitchen table because it'll look bad, but it's not a big problem. We're already using pretty rough and ready lumber, and we're making a tool. We're going to take a wet, stinky animal hide and stretch it over this to dry it out. It doesn't have to be a pretty kitchen table, okay? Now, I'm not going to do too much detail on edge planing and the edge glue up. That's covered really well on YouTube in general. Go look in the hand tool woodworking space, and there's a ton of information on that. Anything I would do would just be redundant. So Rex Kruger is a really good channel. Wood by Right is a really good channel, and they both have really good entry-level beginners tutorials, both on what planes to buy for this and how to approach it in terms of strategy. What I will say, just to add my 2 cents to the conversation, the biggest mistake and the hardest thing to manage is to keep that edge perfectly square. It's going to have a tendency to dip one way or the other. Hopefully not this extreme. But you're always going to have a tendency to rock the plane one way or the other depending on your dominant hand and which direction you're planing. So what I like to do is I'll get them as dead straight as possible, get them to the point where I know they're agreeing with each other, and then I'll look and I'll hold them against a door jamb and see if they're tipping this way or that way. They tip toward the low side, okay? Then if you take your two boards, if they're dead flat, they'll meet and be flat all the way across the top. But once you identify the low side from your little bit of human error, if you clamp them together in a vise so that the low sides are together and the high sides tip up, then you have those two surfaces. And I like to do this with a rasp. I'll just take the rasp and go across those high edges, which aren't this exaggerated, obviously, until I have even rasp marks all the way across, and it's really easy to see. That'll be dead flat, and then when I put them together, usually if they're about 90% correct, and I just keep trying and fiddling and trying and fiddling, I'm kind of chasing my tail, they stay 90% correct, but won't go to 100% correct. Usually it's because there's that little bit of an angle in them. So do this, take your rasp, file that until it's flat, and you have that even rasp marks all the way across. Stack them edge to edge, look for light, and you probably won't see any. Okay? So those are my tips on edge joining for these pieces. Also doing the final rasp finish on the edge is really nice for the glue up because it leaves a toothed surface, which will give you a stronger glue joint than a smooth surface from the plane. Okay? Now the last thing I'm going to say is I like to get these dead on and then look at how the tips line up. Okay? And then I do the tips last, and on these boards, the tip glue up really doesn't take that much. It doesn't take that much adjusting to get these square because they're all in the same plane. It's a little trickier with the others, so I'm going to glue these up, show you what the final result looks like, and then we'll look at some with the tailboard, both in terms of modifying patterns and in terms of some of the peculiarities of the glue up. Let's look at these a little bit now. So these are the small and the medium raccoon stretchers, ready for the shaping and the glue up. Now these have just been jigsawed out of the planks, and because I'm cutting these out with a jigsaw, there's a lot of woogity around the cut edges, which in this case involves the mating surfaces with the tailboard. Tailboard's pretty good. That's cut on a table saw, so that's a pretty good straight cut just as is. That's not where our woogity's coming from. But because of that, they often don't meet at the correct angle. So if you look at this one in particular, there's a big protrusion right here that's pushing this kind of way too far forward. And if I match this so that they meet there, you can see just how much overlap there is in the tips. It's really ridiculous. But that's because of bad angles on these cut edges. That's not actually real. Okay? So the first thing I will do is take a block plane and shave this down. Right here it's real deep, here it's real high, there it's real high. Shave that down flat and shave the opposite one down flat. And then once those are flat, across here, I often use a draw knife and a rasp to get into there because you can only get up to about where my finger is here with the block plane. Okay, the blade doesn't go all the way to the front. Once that's shaved down with the combination of those three tools, then I will look at these. Those should come together fairly well. If they're tipped way in or way back, then that's angle of approach here in the back, so you fix that. If it is fairly straight, but with just a little bit of overlap, what I like to do is mark that, and then eyeball where about half of that is, and mark a second line. Okay. Now this is hypothetical, not real, of course. And then I'll clamp these together in the vise and plane it until I get to that middle line. So I'm cutting both of them down symmetrically to eat up the distance that I need to eat up in between the two pieces. And then that works really well, and if there's a little bit of woogetiness after having done that, then I'll just adjust that a little bit as I need to. But that's my general approach. Now, what that looks like when it's finished is right here with a nice straight mating plane, okay, between these tips. However, there is a second approach, and I did that here. If I have a large defect in one side or the other, I'm always cutting these ends a little bit oversized, right? So if I have a large defect in one side or the other, then I can just favor a side. And if you see on this one, right there's the line. It's off center, and then it swings and comes out this way. So there was a big defect in this piece, so I just cut away that defect and favored one side. So how that would look is if these were overlapping, right, something like that, and there's a defect, hypothetically, there's a defect in this one, then I could trace where that overlap is, and instead of drawing an intermediate line and cutting them both down symmetrically, I could just take the draw knife and take that whole piece out, and then make good wood to good wood, having cut the defect away. So that's, since I'm always cutting these tips way oversized, right, like right here, the actual line is way back in there. This one I really cut oversized because it was against another piece, and I just kind of left it. So, since they're always cut a little bit oversized, if I get in here and find a surprise, because again, I'm using pretty rough and ready old lumber, then I can always have a second approach to use the good one to compensate for material in the bad one. This is the small raccoon board that we just made. Now, before I go farther, I want to talk a little bit about modifying these stretchers that have a tailboard arrangement in them. There's a little bit more that you need to think about than when you're modifying the ones that are straight all the way to the base. And there's kind of two ways to go about this. One is to make one that's slightly oversized and then carve the board you want out of it. Okay, so this is oversized according to the pattern provided. This is a skunk-specific board. So if I want to make a skunk-specific board with this ventilated pattern, I can take the small raccoon board, superimpose the skunk board on it, trace, make sure it's centered up nicely. I'm not actually going to cut this down. I'm just doing this for demonstration, so, you know, close enough's close enough. Except that's not close enough. Okay? So we can trace the skunk board on here and then take a draw knife or go back to the jigsaw and cut it out to that outline. And then you'd have a skunk-specific ventilated stretching board. Okay? So that's one way. If you have a favorite board that you want to keep using your pattern, your outline, but you want the ventilated style, just make one from the pattern set that's a size larger than what you're eventually going to work with. Roosters are so rude. Anyway, that's slightly larger than the eventual piece that you want to work with, and cut your pattern out after you finish the layout. That's one way to modify these. The other way is to start from scratch. So if I take this board, first this end is completely rotten out, so I'm just going to come back a ways, give myself a reference line there. Now this is the pattern for the Red Fox. And this is about a 7-inch wide board, depending on how much you plane on the base when you're finishing it. We'll talk about that later. If, let's say you live in an area where you have Arctic Fox, which are substantially larger, and you want an 8-inch wide board, well, we can start doing the same thing as we did before. Measure a mark 4 inches up. Lay this on that mark. Line up the tip. Line up the base. And then trace around it. And now here for the ventilation, the ventilated cutout, we can mark that as well from the original pattern. But we can't cut this line for the tailboard out, okay? Because this is at the wrong angle, and if we cut this and then put a straight tailboard in, it's not going to work. So we need to come and decide whether we want a 3.5 inch or 4-inch tailboard. I'm going to mark this for 3.5 inch, which means I'm going to go up 1 3/4 inches. Make sure I'm looking at this right. Hi, Creamy. This is Creamy Cat. That's right there. And now I'm going to do the same thing here at the bottom of the cutout. 1 3/4. Are you helping? Creamy's helping. And then we can draw this line. Come down here. And then we're going to want to modify the cutout a little bit. I'm going to come up 1 1/4 inches so that there's enough overlap here to be a stop. And then just pick a nice looking line and run that in to the rest of the cutout. Okay? So now when we cut this out, it will be straight, and it will actually work with the straight edge of a piece of 1x4. Standard nominal dimension 1x4 will fit right in there nicely and provide a stretcher of a different dimension. Here we have the 5 boards that we've been working on with this video. The first one is that massively oversized coyote board for the occasionally massively oversized eastern coyote. Then we have undersized coyote board, and a coyote board which doesn't have the shoulder cut out is more typical of what you'll see in most published patterns for coyote boards that would also fit a lynx if you have those in your area. And then the last 2 are the small and medium raccoon boards. Now, the large coyote board has been sent through the thickness planer and planed down to 1/2 inch. I need to do that with these other 4, but I wanted to show you this glue up, and I'm not sure how it's going to pick up, but you can see there is a little bit of cupping. These are a little bit up relative to the base, and that's the sort of thing that you can tolerate in this if you assemble it thick from just straight 1x4 and 1x6 dimensional stock. You can tolerate some of this cupping and wave, because then you're going to plane it down to 1/2 inch and just take it right off, so it's not a big deal. Also, here, and I use this as a giant pointer, Here in the top of the large coyote board, you can see a knot blew out. We need to fix that. So I'm going to take these 4, plane them down, and then I'll show you how I fix defects and finish the rounded edge. Now the last thing I want to talk about here is finishing these square edges. These all need to be rounded. And the best tool I have found for that is just a block plane. I've tinkered with power sanders, I've tinkered with rasps, I've tinkered with everything you can think of. And I just keep coming back to this being the most efficient tool for the job. We just clamp the board, this is one of the Fox boards, to an edge or clamp it in a vise, and just use the plane to flatten the top, take off the irregularities from the cutting out, and then at a 45-degree angle, and just one section at a time, round it over like that. Now, you can use whatever tool here you're comfortable with. This is what I've found the most success with. If you have a spoke shave, that would be really great for some of the inside curves where you get those in the Fox and Coyote boards. Now, when we get over to the end, same idea, but now we'll clamp it flat. And having clamped it flat, we can work on these curves the same way. And work that down to a nice profile. Lastly with finishing is repairing gaps. So if you can see right here, I have a little Dutchman. There was a knot in there, and I just cut out a little square of wood and glued in a little block, right? And I just cut these. I'll cut the little scrap, I'll trace around it, and cut it, the opening just slightly smaller than the block, and then just use a rasp on the edges and widen it until it just fits. And then again, to knock this down, the trusty little hand plane. And that comes down quite nicely. So, my clamp would stay on, that is. That's the end of the finishing steps. And then you can sand it up as nice as you want. I do intend eventually to come in around all of these edges and file those off. This hemlock is really, really splintery to the point of being almost dangerous. I would use different wood if you're buying it for these, but this is what I have unlimited and free, so it's okay. But you do want to be careful with splintery woods and sand all of your sharp edges so you don't get slivers in your thumb that require band-aids. Anyhow, that's how we make the boards. So thanks for coming along with the project. If you want that from Patreon, sign up. We are an unsponsored channel, and we want to keep it that way to keep independence. We are doing a little bit of monetization because I realized they were running ads on us anyway, so I might as well get a little bit of a cut for it. So I have added that in, but we are still unsponsored and hope to be able to keep it unsponsored. But in order for that to be true, we do need to be able to, buy materials, buy glue, get, what we need for these sorts of projects, to be able to travel and show you things and take you along on all of these learning adventures. All of this stuff that I'm talking about is in the digital store, and everything in that digital store is free to patrons at any subscription level, okay? What I hope to do with this, because I am making boards here, I'm making prototyping boards for critters that I do not have in my area, okay? I'm doing that because I want this to be as broadly applicable and as useful to as many people as humanly possible. But what I would love is to have an iterative process where you go, download these patterns, use them for a year or two, describe them, we talk to each other over on the Patreon, and in a couple of years then I could re-prototype, do another iteration, republish, and cycle, rinse, repeat until we have absolutely the best possible set of patterns imaginable. Okay? That's the goal. But to do that, we need community, and we need a lasting community. So, that's the plug for the Patreon. Couple of last tips on this. One is when you're picking your glue. I didn't talk about that yet. I'm using exterior grade yellow wood glue for this. It's just a PVA, like a waterproof PVA. You can really use just about any good wood glue that you want, but you do want to make sure it's an exterior grade. You wouldn't want to use white, like white school glue, because the moisture from damp hides may over time let it relax. You could always reglue it, but we just assume not have to do extra steps that we don't have to do, right? So make sure that you use an exterior grade glue. I don't worry too much about knots. Like right here, I was showing how I put these Dutchmen in. Here's just another example in this, right? There was a big old knot. You can see the big old split there, okay? But just cut in, put this little Dutchman in there, and good as new, and perfectly happy in terms of using this for a stretcher board, right? We're making a tool. We're not making a kitchen table. So it is different. You need your glue joints to be good enough to be strong, and the glue needs to be good enough to be strong and not relax with a little humidity. But it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to, you don't have to impress anybody with absolutely perfect glue joints. They just need to work. And that makes this a really good skill building project if you want to get deeper into woodworking and you want to practice your edge joining technique. Because you can do a whole lot of them, and the ones, as long as they're strong, the ugly ones still count. So you're not going out and buying expensive $10 or $20 a board foot fancy lumber and then screwing up a glue joint and having an ugly table. So this is a really good skill building project, even beyond the utility of the board itself. So I hope to see you over on Patreon. I hope to see you in other videos in the channel, and I hope you have a blessed day.